Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth lesson of the Web Development Foundations Bootcamp. In this one, we'll be putting into practice what we've learned from the CSS Fundamentals lesson. And for this, we'll be creating the block preview card, which is a newbie challenge on the frontendmentor.io platform. To use this platform, you have to have a GitHub account, so you can go and create one if you haven't. When you click on the Start Challenge button, you get access to download assets and submit solutions for this challenge. I've done that already. So here's a brief preview of what you're going to be creating. As you can see, this is a very basic user interface that is going to put into practice what we've learned in the CSS fundamentals. So we'll be making use of colors and also the box models to practicalize this. And to show you what I mean, you can also see the description of this challenge. It just focuses on CSS and HTML fundamentals and to also make sure you understand how the box model works. So here's a preview of what you're going to be building. This is the desktop design and this is the mobile design. As you can see, it is pretty much the same thing. So we'll be using one interface for both the desktop and also mobile views. Now, since this is a free plus challenge on frontendmentor.io, we also have access to the Figma file. You can see if you click on the download assets section, you get the starter materials or starter files for this project, and you can also access the Figma file. I'd also be using the Figma file for this lesson, so you get to experience what it feels like to convert a user interface into code. Go ahead and download these too if you haven't. And if you don't know what Figma is, it is simply a design application just like Photoshop, but this time around, it is built mainly for creating user interfaces. This is what the starter project looks like. As you can see, we have an index.html provided to us by frontmentor.io, and it contains the basic content of the web page. This is the content of the web page, and you can see it has the basic skeleton of a HTML page. So I've already copied this into our project right now. As you can see, I've done that already, but this is just what it contains. And when we run this file, you can see some text on our browser over here. And this is just the frontendmentor.io stuff, whereby you just have to provide attribution when you're using their project. I'm also going to drop a link to this challenge in the description. And not to worry, I'll show you how to position and also hide this type of elements during this lesson. The next thing to point out is we also have something called a fav icon, which is the icon you see at the title bar of your tab. For this, Frontend Mentor also provided us a favicon.ico file, which is what we can see at the left corner of the title. The fav icon is what you get to see in websites, just like Google Fonts, you get to see Google's Fonts version. And this is also provided to us in the assets folder. You can see the images for this and the illustration and also the avatar image, which is from the user interface. We also have the design mockup for this challenge. You can see the desktop design over here. If you zoom in, you can see what it looks like. We also have the mobile design preview and also the active states. Whenever we hover on this title, the text color changes. When you're not on the pro plan of frontendmentor.io, this is what you'll be working with. And for those challenges that don't give you a Figma file, there's a style guide to guide you during your development. As you can see, if we zoom in, you can see the dimensions for the layouts, the colors we'll be using, the typography, you can see the font size, and also the fonts family we'll be using for this project. And it also says that this is the free plus challenge, so you can get access to the Figma file. Let's get started. So if you go over and copy up the first thing you should do would be to copy the images folder into your application like so, and also the fonts folder. But I'm not going to copy the fonts folder because what this does is that it gives us access to work with the font locally. But if you remember from the last lesson, we have a way to download these fonts or to link the online resource of these fonts to our application. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up in our browser. I've done that already. And this is the Fig Tree font. So I'm going to get this font. And from the design over here, or from the style guide, it says we are going to be using the fonts width 500 and 800, but I'll just be linking everything. So I'll say get embed code. This time around, I'll be using the import syntax to bring this into our application. So I'm going to copy this, then head over to styles.css, then paste it as the first line of our code. So this is another way of importing or linking style sheets if you don't want to use the link elements. Then the next thing would be to also define this in our style sheet. So I'm going to copy the style, head over to styles.css, then I'm going to also do this for the body or for the HTML, whichever one. I'm going to save my work, and instantly you can see the font changes, but you don't get to see that now. There's one thing I also want to mention. Over here, you can see something called the reset.css file. And if you go and open it up, this is just basically what we did from the last lesson, where we reset values of elements using the universal selector. You can see over here, we set the box size into border box, and I covered this in the last lesson. And also here, we removed the margin and the padding. We also removed the list style. If you recall from the HTML section where we worked with unordered list, you could see the list had some bullets, which were kind of like circles before the list items. So over here, this is kind of like resetting everything and also giving some basic styling for the images to make the widths 100% of the size and so on. So you don't need to worry about this file. This is a common file in web design, and this is a version from this particular website. So if you just Google reset.css, you get to see something like this. And I'm also going to provide you with this resource in the description of this video. So that is what this reset.css does. And I import it or I link it before our own style sheet. So what this does is it's going to reset it first, then we start creating our styles. And if you remember, the order at which you declare all these things is very important, because if you put this reset afterwards, we might have some problems or undesired styles in our web page. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do would be to create the HTML structure. But before that, I want you to notice something. In the previous lesson, I showed you how to link style sheets using an external file. There's also an element or a tag that you can add to your head section for creating styles. And that is what the folks at frontendmentor.io did over here. You can see the style tag, and inside here you can also declare CSS rules for different classes. So this is another way of doing this. But like I told you, separation of concerns. It's better to delegate the styling to a separate file for easy management. So this is the one that they added for us, and it is for this text content over here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, you can see this div has a class called attribution. For now, I'm going to add a CSS property called display none. And if we save our work, you can see it disappears. We also have another one we can set, which is visibility. We can set it to hidden, and it also does something similar. But I'll leave this for now. The next thing I'm going to be doing is to create the HTML structure. Now, if you look at the design, I'm going to be opening up Figma. So if you download that, you register for Figma, you can log in with your Gmail, with your Google account, and you would also have this. This type of document is called like a design system. So most times when you're doing your web development or front-end web development, you have a UI UX person that comes up with the design and the colors and everything, then hands it over to you as a front-end developer. So this document is very useful when building interfaces because it's going to guide you on what to do and all the whole details required. With this, you don't have to think too much about designs because you already have a style to follow. Let's head over to the design system, and if we zoom in, you can see we have access to the style guide and everything. And one thing to notice, I won't be diving too much into all these details because we are not yet in the building layout section. We're going to be doing that in the next 2 or 3 lessons. But I'll just use this document at the surface level. So you can see we have access to the color, we have the hex value, we have the RGB value, and also the HSL value. I've talked about the hexadecimal value, the RGB, which is red, green, blue, and now we have the HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. So it's a three group value for creating colors. And I think the style guide over here provided us with the HSL, so we're going to be using that since we've talked about this first two in the previous lesson. So you can see we have access to both the typography, the font size, the line height, and everything. So we'll be working with these documents while we develop. But for now, I'll be focusing on the designs. So let me zoom in. The design for the web and mobile is quite similar. So I'll just use the design for the web to continue. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we have to think of how to convert this design into a HTML structure. Now, the first thing we'll notice is that this is called a card, or this kind of user interface is called a card. And I want you to look at the bottom left corner of your screen. You can see over here, the UI guy or UI person already separated our user interface into different sections. So overall, we have the card, which is the kind of like container for the whole content. Then we have the blog image, we have the content, and we have the author. So the first thing I'm going to do would be to create this base structure. So I'll head over to my HTML and start coding. So inside our body, we're going to create an article. Instead of using a div tag, we're using an article because this kind of user interface is better to use something called semantic HTML. Because if you use something like a div tags just signify divisions in your web page or your user interface. These are not really descriptive because you can have lots of div tags, but you don't know their role or their functionality. So to create more accessible web pages, you make use of semantic HTML, and I'll be using that for this lesson and future lessons in order for us to follow best practices. And using semantic HTML also helps with accessibility of our sites. I'm going to be using an article for this because an article is an independent and self-contained element that could be reused at multiple places in our web page. So this kind of user interface could be used for a blog platform, and it could have multiple cards which could be lined up side by side. So an article would be a good HTML element for this. Enough talk and let's get started. So I'm going to name this card. Then inside it we have three sections. The first one is the image over here, image, content, and author. So for this image, I'm going to be using something called a figure. Then the next section would be the content. The last section would be a footer. Another semantic HTML is the section. So instead of using div tag once again, you kind of like use semantic HTML to say that this particular block of code is going to be a portion of our user interface. So as the name suggests, section, which is kind of like a portion of our user interface. If we hover over this to not get confused, you can see a description of what it does. It is just simply used to group content, and it is preferred over div tags. Inside this section, when you double click on it on Figma, you can see you can open up its content. So it has a category, publish date, title, and description. I'll create that now in our HTML code. For the category, for the content section, you can see what we did over here. And one thing to note is that we're using the BEM naming approach for our CSS classes. So BEM simply stands for Block Element Modifier. In this case, the card is the block because it can be reused in multiple places of our web page, and it can also be standalone. For content inside this block, we call them elements, and you name these classes using the double underscore, which shows that the name of this class is image, but it is contained inside a parent called card, and that is why we named it card double underscore image, which stands for the image is inside the card. Same thing for the content, so the content is inside the card. This is just a naming approach to help us easily identify our CSS classes. So the same thing happens for date, title, description. All these are dependent of what? The card class, which means that they cannot stand on their own. Rather, they belong to some type of parent element. For this user interface, there is no modifier as I can see for now, but just have this in mind that this is the block and these are elements inside the block. Now, for the learning link over here, we did not make use of the BEM naming since the category section can be independent and can be used in multiple places in our application. If you take a look at this, this is the stuff I'm talking about. This chip, we could actually name it category chip or something like that. This kind of stuff can be reused in multiple places in our user interfaces, and it is not directly linked to this card element. So probably you could use it for filters in your blog application or something. You get the idea. We're done with the card content section. Let's head over to the footer section. And you can see over here, the footer section is this last group we're going to be working with. So if I hover over the footer section, you can see the footer element represents a footer for its nearest ancestor, sectioning, and so on and so forth. It is kind of like representing that this is the footer of this article, which is its ancestor or parent. So that is why I'm currently using footer. We can also use div if you want to, but footer is more descriptive and helps with accessibility. So inside this footer, we have two elements. First, we have the image and we also have this text. The name of this footer is what? Author. So I can name this class. Okay, no. I think we can name it card footer. So I'll add the contents like so. Once I'm done with this, I can delete this contents over here. And now we have the base structure of our web page. And I want you to also notice something. In some elements, I did not actually give them classes. Like this image over here, I did not give it a class. And I did not also wrap it in a figure. I just use this to show you that there's an element for helping you wrap your images. So for this, I'm just going to be using the image directly. And I'm also going to be using a span. Now there's something I noticed. Remember I told you about images being inline elements in the HTML section. But over here, I'm saying that this image is taking up the full width of this page. And I know what is currently the problem, but let me just show you how to debug this. So I click on the image and do inspect. And what is actually going on? So I go to styles. And you can see over here, we've set the image to display block, which is the cause of that problem. But if we remove the display block, it sets it back to the natural way this image is supposed to be, which is inline. And the reason we have this is a normal way or normal thing that should happen. But since we are not yet creating layouts with something called Flexbox or CSS grid, I need to remove that CSS rule. And the place we declared this was in the reset.css. If you scroll down to the image section, you can see we made the image section. All images, pictures, and SVGs should have the display block instead of the natural one of display inline. I'm going to leave this like this for now, since we can always reset this during our styling. This is the basic structure of the HTML page. And I believe this is self-descriptive if you covered the HTML lessons we've done earlier. Let's head over to styling this web page. So I head over to styles.css, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this. In the user interface in the challenge over here, you can see the body has this color. So to get that color, we can just click on this and get the color. But if we head over to the style guide, you can see we already have the colors, the HSL color in the downloaded file. So I can also come here and see the background, let me remove this. The background color should be this. And I save my work, and instantly you can see we have this background color. Now, the next thing to do would be, if we take a look at our design over here, you can see this card has a white image. So let's change the background color of the card class. Background color to, let's take a look at the style guide. The style guide says this is white. So this is the HSL value for white. And if you want to know how HSL works, you can head over to W3 School to see how this actually works. So I save my work, and instantly you can see the background color changes. This time around it takes up the whole width, but let's make this, we can always click on this place and check the width. You can see the width is 384. And what does our style guide say? Our style guide says the width should be 375. But they also told you something here that you should note, that these are just design sizes. Ensure the content is responsive and meets the WAC, that's Web Content Accessibility Guideline requirements, by testing this in larger screens and so on and so forth. But since you're not working, or since you're not creating a responsive design, that is a design that adapts or adjusts to both desktop and mobile interfaces, we would just be setting a fixed width for the card class. And I'll set the width to, let's say, 320 pixels. And you can see this is the width of 320 pixels. So this right now, since I'm not creating responsive, since I'm not making it adjust to web and mobile, I'm just trying to, okay, let me see the mobile version and stick to that. The mobile version says, no, the mobile version says 327. Okay, so let me stick to that. 327 pixels. Okay, cool. So we have the width already, but I want you to notice something right now. Remember what I told you about paddings and margin? So inside here, we already know that we have a padding. So I think let's attend to that padding first of all before we talk about the margin. So in here, we can see we have a spacing between the edge or the border and the content of this box or this container. So to get the padding value, you can see the padding over there. When you just click on here, it shows you 24, which means 24 pixels. So we can see padding of 24 pixels. And if you don't want to always be coming over here to click on this, you can just head over to the design system. And if you scroll down, you can see different values. So we have the spacing of 4, 8 pixels, 12 pixels, and 24 pixels. So all these are contained in the style guide. So right now we have a padding of 24 pixels. The next thing is that we also have a border. If you take a look at the border, we have a black border. So what does the style guide say for that color? What's the color for that? I think the color is going to be this, because the lightness shows that it is 7, this is black, then 7% light. So this is going to be the black. And not to worry if you don't understand how these values are, just head over to the style guide, or let me see, head over to the style guide and take a look at the color. You can see over here, this is the black color and this is the gray color, and you can see the HSL value, which is what I just copied. So I'm going to come over here and say the border should be 1 pixel and it should be solid, which means it should be strong. Then we also have the HSL value, and right now you can see the black border. Right now we can see that the whole interface is pushed to the left. So I want to kind of like center it horizontally in our screen. Now, remember what I told you about margins. Margins is kind of like the space from the border or from the edge of the box to the outside content or to the outside world. So right now there's a trick for setting the margin. And one thing to note is that this padding you see over here is kind of like a shorthand for give me the padding at all sides. So this is padding at the top, right, bottom, left of 24 pixels. If you want to set the padding to top, bottom to 24 and maybe the right and left to 60 pixels, you can see this is This longer form signifies give me a padding of 24 pixels at the top and bottom and 60 pixels by the left and the right. If you now want to give specific ones, you can say top, or let me just say this is top, right, bottom, left. But you replace this with values. So this could be 24 pixels, 3 pixels, 15 pixels, and 12 pixels. The reason I'm just showing you this is just to have an understanding of what is actually going on. So you say the padding of 24 pixels. We can also be specific and say we want, for instance, if we only want the padding on the left, we can say padding left to 24 pixels and save. You can say the padding is only applied to the left. This is the full CSS property for that. So I'll undo and save my work. Now for margin, I'm going to set the margin using that same thing we just learned. So for the top and the bottom, I want the margin to be 0. Then for the left and right, I want the margin to be auto, which means the browser should calculate equal margins from the left and the right. So to get that, let me see, auto, okay, let me save my work. So automatically the browser calculates the margin on the left and the right because we've specified the one at the top and bottom to 0. So you can see 0, which means no margin at the top and also no margin at the bottom. But for the left and the right axis, we use the value of auto to delegate the calculation of the margin to the browser. So over here, it kind of like sets equal margin by the left and by the right. So with this trick, we kind of like put our box or our container in the center. Now for the top, we can come here and explicitly say margin top should be 50 pixels, let's see, and we have a margin at the top. When we get to building layouts, you'd get to see easier ways to make all this positioning work better or to flow better. When I introduce you to CSS Flexbox and grids, all this type of interfaces would be easier to build. So remember what I told you about cascading, the rules goes from top to bottom. So over here we've said 0 at the top, 0 at the bottom, left and right auto. Then we now come here and explicitly say the margin on the top should be 50 pixels. Cool. Let's take a look at the design. You can see we have the border, we can see we have the curves at the edges of this particular box. You can see this rounded box. And do I know how to do this? Let me see. Okay, we have a property called corner radius and it is set to 20. Now, in CSS, this is known as border radius, and let's set it to 20 pixel and let's see what happens. And instantly we have these curves. This is cool. One more thing we should also see is we also have this shadow, this box shadow over here, this black box shadow. So let's head over and create that. So the CSS rule for that is box shadow. Most of all these CSS rules are just very, very easy to understand just from the naming. So let's see how far it is pushed. Let me see, I click on this and let's see if we have drop shadow, effect setting. And you can see this is why it's always, when you work in a good working environment, most of the times you'll be working with Figma files and you can see how easy it is. I'm not guessing my way through the user interface. I'm actually coming to Figma and getting these values. So as you go down your front-end development path, if you're going to focus on front-end, you're going to eventually learn how to navigate around Figma. You might not necessarily learn how to build these interfaces, but you should be able to navigate your way around Figma. So you can see the X and Y position is moved to 8. 8 on the horizontal axis and 8 on the vertical axis. So let's do that now. 8 pixel on the horizontal axis and 8 pixel on the vertical axis. And if we save this work right now, we should see this, but I want to explicitly give it this color because by default it is going to take up the color of this, of the fonts that are of the text contained inside this. So if I want to be explicit, I'm just going to copy this color and paste it. You won't notice much difference, but this is a different color. And I can show you that by just saying, maybe say green. You can see it is green. but I'll undo that. And we have the correct design. So right now, I think we already have covered the basic structure of the card, which is the box. Now it's time to head over and create the styles for the content of this card. Now, the first one we're going to be focusing on, the first one we'll be looking at is this figure. So I'm going to head over to this. So now we want to work on card image. Let me work on card image. And if you can see, this also has a border radius of, let me click on this. It has a corner radius of 10. Okay, so this is not so curved as the parent. So let's head over and give it a... And right now we can't see the corner radius. And this is simply because we need to target the image and not the figure itself. So I'm just going to say card image, then target this image. So remember what I taught you about specificity. So right now we're being more specific to say, give this border radius to the card image, and instantly you see the corner radius. Now, using this figure is optional, but I'm going to be using figure right now to just show you a way to create HTML markup that are more accessible. Now, the next thing is also the height of this figure. Let's see, 279 by 200. So the height of this is actually 200. So let's set that up. If you notice something, we shouldn't be setting the height of the image directly to 200 pixel, because what happens right now is, if I head over to my DevTools, is that the image itself is now bigger than the container. And if I inspect the image, can you see this is the image and this is the figure? Okay, this is not really descriptive, but I already know what is happening. I already know the problem that we have here. What we're going to do is that we're going to move this height property to what? To the card image itself, which is the container. So I'm going to do this, and this works. So I can even, to show you that it works, I can say 500 pixels, and you can see the height is 500 pixels. For this, I'm going to leave it at 200 pixels. But I think we have an issue right now. Because if I look at the card image, let me make it to 300 just to show you the issue. You can see it is extending, and this image itself is not also extending. So to set the image to kind of like cover the parent's width or its ancestor, we have a property called object fit. So we set the object fit to cover. We have different types over here, but to set it to cover the parent or the existing space, we make use of the cover property. So if I save this, it does not still work. Oops. The reason it does not work is simple. If you head over to the reset.css, we can see we set the image width to 100%, but we did not set its height. So let us add the height of, let's see, height to 100%. And it covers this time around. So one thing about CSS, as long as you know the basics, you have the foundational knowledge, you can be able to know which of these styles are giving you problems, then you adjust them accordingly. That was the importance of the previous class, where we went step by step to know how these individual properties work and also how the box model works. So I'm going to set the height back to 200, and everything works as expected. You can see it matches the UI over here. So this is the one for the card image. So for the card image, we give it a height of 200, and for the image itself, we give it a height of 100%, which means fill up as much as possible space that the parent gives. Now, you might be wondering, should we rename this class of card image to something else? I could name it to banner, card banner, or whichever one you want. But I'll just leave it this way, but you can rename it if you want. So now, let's head over to the next step. So you can see this is the first section, this is section, and this is the footer. So for the first section, we're done with that. Second section, we're done. We're about to get there. And let me see. I want to talk about the spacing right now. If we click on this container, or if we click on the parent, you can see there is a gap of 24 pixels. If I hover, can you look at this place? I want you to look at this place and this place. Can you see already the gap is 24 pixels? The gap is also 24 pixels. If you are using an advanced layout element or an advanced layout engine like Flexbox or CSS Grid, you'd have an easier approach to how to tackle this. But for this case, we would just be using margins by default. So over here, we have a margin of 24 pixels at the top and 24 pixels at the bottom of this content or of this card content. We can either give the margin to this image and also give a margin to this, but when you just give this content a margin top and margin bottom, it is going to fix this, or it's going to like work. So I'm going to head over to the card contents class, which is what I'm going to be creating now. So I'm going to scroll down and say card margin at the top. Is there a margin at the left and right? Let me hover. No margin at the left and right. So I'm going to say margin top bottom should be 24, left and right should be 0. And instantly we see this margin. If you head over to what's this called, pesticide, you can see automatically we have a margin of 24 pixels at the top and 24 pixels at the bottom. So we are making progress. The next thing to do inside this container is, let's see, what does it have again? It does not have a padding because the parent already has this padding. So individual items also have margins of 12 individually. When we're working in week 3 of building layouts, that is week 3, all this interface would be easier to create when using something like Flexbox. But since we've not gotten there, this is the manual way to do it. So the first item inside this I'm going to be working with is the category class. So we're going to be working with this category class. So I'm going to head off over to this place. Since this is a general class, let me just put this. So I'm going to come here and put the category class, since I give you an idea that we could be using this in multiple places in our user interfaces. So for this, the category is a link. So I could say, okay, text decoration none, and it removes the underline. The next thing I'm going to say is, let me give it a background color. Okay, it has the background color. Then the color itself, let me put the color. The color itself is what? It's going to be this black color. And you can see the black color. Now, the padding, it has padding. If I click on this, okay, the padding is 12. So 12 and 4. So 12, I want you to be looking at this place while I hover on this. So the horizontal padding is 12, and the padding at the vertical axis, top and bottom, is 4. So let me put padding. Top, bottom is 4 pixel, and left and right is 12 pixels. And we have the padding. Then the same thing for the corner radius. Let's scroll. The corner radius is 4. And this is what is called border radius, 4 pixels. And we have the style for that. Now, the next thing I noticed, or the next thing, let me see, is the font size. What is the font size? The font size is 12. But now, clicking on all this thing is becoming stressful. So what I'm going to do is to head over to the design system, and let's go to typography. We have different presets. We have the Fig 3 medium, we have the text presets 1, 2, 3, and 3 bold. So let me see which one this one actually uses. Does it use a text preset? It does not use a text preset. If I click on this, okay, so it doesn't matter. So I just click on this and let's see. The font size is 12. Then this is extra bold. But if you're getting confused now, let's just head over to this style guide and let's go to the weights. So by default, I think the weights for the fonts in this app is 500. Then for the bold font, it is 800. And if you look at this, so all these weights 500, 500, then these darker shades are 800. So the thing I'm going to do here is to say font weight. I want you to look at the text, what's the stuff that's going to happen. So font weight 500. Can you see it's a little bit bold? If I say 800, for instance, now it's going to be more bold. It's like kind of like the thickness of the font. So all fonts should have the weight of 500. Then for this category, I'm going to set the weight to what? Font weight to 800. And you can see it has this bold text. But one more thing is the font size. The font size is 12, so I'm going to set the font size to 12 fonts. And we have that styled. So the next thing is the spacing between this is, let's see. I'm not going to add the spacing on this. I'm going to be adding the spacing on the dates. So the margin top and bottom is 12 for this particular class. Let me do that now. So this section is for the general styles. This is for the card. So if we have other classes in our user interface, we'll just add it over here. So the next element we're going to be working with is this element, which is the card date. So for the card date, the first thing I'm going to do is margin at the top and bottom 12 pixel, left and right 0. And instantly we have the margin. You can see over here we have the margin at the top and the bottom. Now we got that, let's take a look at the color. So we can see the color gray 950, and what is color gray 950? Let's head over to the design system and see if we have it. So color gray 950, correct, which is a dark color. And I think I should just set, let's see, I think I should set the color of everything to that. So I head over to body and set the color of everything to 950, yeah, to that. So we don't have to be overriding it every time. So now the next thing is also what is the font size? The font size is 12. So the font size of the card date is what? 12 pixels. And we have that. Everything looks okay so far. Now, let's head over to the title section. And already we can see the font weight should be bold. So card_title, copy that. Instantly we see it's bold. Then for the font size, okay, we also have the font size of 20. Then it should also have a space between, and we already know what that space is. It's 12 pixels. So I give it a margin bottom of 12 pixels. So for the card title, I'm going to set the margin, and we have that margin. The next part we're going to be working with is the card description. So I'll copy that. Then for the font color, let's head over to the design system. And you can see it's this gray color over here. So the HSL is this, but I think we have that in our style guide already. So this is a light gray. I copy it, I head over to here and say color. And instantly we have this. Cool. So the next thing we're going to be doing is, let me see, let's check the line height in our design. What is the line height? The line height is the spacing between each line of text. So the line height over here is 150, which I believe is the default. So let's head over to the reset.css to check the line height. Okay, the line height is correct. 1.5 is the same thing as 150%. Remember from the last lesson, we learned that this line height property could have a number, a length, or percentage. So the length could be in pixels or RAM, while the number could be something like this, and also percentage. So 1.5 is the same thing as 150%. So I think there's no need to set the line height because that is the correct line height if we take a look at this. But one thing to note is the font size. Let's see the font size. The font size says 14 pixels. So let's set that up. I think it closely matches this. It says text preset 2. I'm on the desktop version and I want to see if the setting is different on the desktop version. And when I clicked on this, I checked the typography and I could see text preset 2. So if we head over to the design system and let's go to typography, text preset 2, the line height is 150% and our CSS says 1.5, which is correct. And also the text preset 2 over here says 16 pixels. So I don't want to go into responsive design, but as you can clearly see over here that the font size for the desktop screen is different from the font size on the mobile screen. Because on the mobile screen here, we can see it is actually 14 pixels and we don't have a custom typography. So since we're creating for kind of like mobile screen, I'll stick to the 14 pixels option. Let me confirm something once again. 20 pixels. Text preset 1. If we go to here, text preset 1 says 24. So let's just focus on let's just stick to the mobile values. So I'll stick to this. But when we get to building layout, that's like, we're going to cover responsive layout. So we create our CSS styles in such a way that it would handle both desktop versions and mobile versions. But let's focus on mobile versions moving forward. This is the progress we've made so far. And if I click on pesticide, everything is spaced correctly. So the last section we're going to be styling is the footer. So for card footer, let's see. Card footer has 2 elements. So is there anything special about this? There's really nothing special about card footer. Okay, so I'll just target the image inside card footer. The first thing I want is the display should be what? Inline, which is the natural way text are being displayed. Then for the sizing of the avatar, it says 32 by 32. So I'm going to give the width 32 pixels and the height 32 pixels and save, and we have this. Now the next one is going to be the span inside. Spans are kind of like, doesn't mean anything on its own, but can be useful when used together with global attributes, for instance, class. So I could just come here and say span, or I could say author name, but I'm not going to do that, but let's just target it directly this time around. So I'd say card footer, then the span inside. But normally, normally you should give this a name because, like it says now, it says it should be used with attributes like this. I could give it a class author name, but I'm not going to do that. Let me not complicate this. But normally you should give it a class. But since I can target it this way, for accessibility, this is bad. Do you get? For accessibility, this is bad. You could actually put a class or something like that, but I'm just going to make do with this. So right now, let me see. There's a space in between these two. There's a space in between. Let me see whether the space is in the parents container. I think this is just manual, so I'm just going to use 12 pixels. So I'm going to give this avatar a right margin, right of 12 pixels, and you can see it pushes this. And if I check my style guide or my design system, okay, there's actually one of 8 pixels, so I think the 8 pixel one fits better, but it doesn't matter at this point. If you can notice something, this text is pushed down and I want to kind of like take it up. When you use CSS Flexbox, this is a piece of cake. But right now I want to kind of like vertically align this text to the center. I'm going to be teaching you another technique, which is kind of like a hack. But here we go. If you take a look at this stuff over here in week 2, we talked about positioning elements. I did not cover that in the previous lesson, but this is a good place to talk about positioning, even though that topic is should be under the building layout session, but I'm going to show you right now. So the way I'm going to show you this is, before we talk about how to center this name in this footer, let me quickly show you something about positioning element. So over here we put the display to none, but if I uncomment this or if I comment this, you can see we have this title over here at the bottom, if you can see this closely. The thing I'm going to be doing right now is to show you how to use positioning elements in CSS. And for that, you can position elements at different points in your user interfaces using the position property. To do that, I'm going to head over, since this attribution over here, this attribution class is inside the body element, I'm going to be setting the body element to position of relative and save. Let me go to reset the CSS. If I set anything like that, I can't see anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to set the position to relative, and what this simply means is when you set the parent element of an element or an ancestor of an element to relative, this simply means you can position child elements in relation to it. This might sound a little bit confusing, but let me show you how to do that now. So for this attribution section over here, I can now come over here and say the position of this should be what? Maybe absolute, for instance. Now, when I do absolute, I now have control. You see, by default, it just pushes to the left. But with setting it to absolute, I now have control over how I could position this. So I can come over and say top should be 0, for instance, and automatically it takes it to the top. Let me say the bottom should be 0. Bottom should be 0. Then the left should be 0. Right now, we can see this in our user interface, and the reason is obvious. When you position something at the bottom left, or you have this type of issue, you should just try and scroll. And if you notice, instantly we can see this at the bottom left corner of our UI. Can you see? So we have to scroll to be able to get to it, because we put it at the leftmost part. I don't know if that is right. We put that at the leftmost part of our screen. And the reason why you have to scroll to see this is because of this margin at the top. Remember, when we were creating this box, if we head over to the card class, you can see we have the margin top to 50. Most times when you do something like this, so automatically, when you add the margin at the top of the card to 50, it is going to be added to the total height of the body. So this 50 pixels we added over here is going to push the web page and the whole user interfaces by 50 pixels down. So the distance from this point to this additional point is 50 pixels. If I remove this 50 pixels and save, you can see automatically we can see this item positioned here. So for interfaces like this, we can just say padding top for the body instead of the card. Padding top for the body, and save, and everything is back to normal. Now this is why lessons like the previous one I did is very important, because with this now, if you understand how the box model works, you would see how I debug this by knowing that when I add margin, remember what I told you about margin? Margin is the space of the box to the outside world or the outside content. So when we initially added a margin of top of 50 pixels to this card, it pushed down, it added to the total height of the body. If you can remember from the last lesson when I was adding this calculation, remember I pointed out that even though we don't calculate the margin in the total width calculation, it also adds additional spacing to our user interface. So if you're having difficulty figuring out what is going on, just check the previous lesson and you understand that margins also add to the total size of the web page. So now we have this positioned at the bottom left corner. Back to what I did. I first set the position of the body to relative. Even though we remove this, for instance, now, it is still going to be relative to the body or the HTML tag. But I'm just showing you how this works. So position relative. Then any element or any item inside this, in this case, the attribute is one of the child of over here, the attribute div is one of the child of the body elements. So we now said here that at the bottom 10, it should be 0, at the left 0. So it takes it to the, okay, let me do this left first of all. So if I say left, for instance, now, 50 pixels, watch and see what happens. It pushes it from the left by 50 pixels. If I say bottom to 50 pixels, it pushes it by 50 pixels. So the distance is, let me see if this, oh, it doesn't pick it up. But the distance now is 50 pixels from the left and 50 pixels from the bottom. So this is the basics of positioning. We can have different types. For instance, now I could change this to, instead of position absolute, we can change it to position fixed, for example now. So position fixed, let me see, it's going to be something similar to, it means that it doesn't also scroll. Let me change this to absolute. Absolute moves with the user interface, while position fixed doesn't move with the interface. That item is fixed at that point. Over here, I could come over here and say left should be 10 and the bottom should be 10 pixels. For this, I could just maybe say padding top to 50 pixels. Nothing happens because when you're working with this positioning, the padding and all those margin, it does not work. Rather, you control it with this top left, bottom right attributes. Let me try margin and see what happens. Nothing happens. Let me continue with this. Over here, I could also put, instead, if I don't want it to be by the left, I could put it by the top too. I could change this to top left. So if I also say top should be 0. And why is this stuff happening? Let me see. The padding. Did I give? Okay, I gave it padding top, right? Okay. Okay. So the reason why it is not going to the topmost parts, this is why understanding the box model is important. So the reason why I did not go to the topmost part, remember when we own this, okay, this doesn't even show. When we use CSS dev tools, for instance, now let me go make this bigger. Once we use CSS dev tools to inspect this, let's inspect the card. Can you see over here? Can you see we have a padding at the top and this is the start of this container. So if we want this to go to the topmost part, we just either remove this padding and you can see it goes to the top part. It does not work because we also have the margin top on the attribute to 50. So if I remove this, it takes it to the topmost part. So I could put this back and I could uncomment the padding and it comes. So I could keep doing this. This is just how to position elements. So if I could also move this, instead of positioning at the left, I could put it at the right and it goes to the right. If I go to the bottom and I say bottom, it goes over here to this place. So let me put this at the left. So we have this over here. So you can see automatically we positioned this. We now have this stuff at the bottom corner. That is just the basics of positioning in CSS. So over here, the reason I showed you this stuff was because I wanted to put this text in the center. And the reason why I'm going through all this hard process is just to show you how the box model works. When you use CSS Flexbox, this will be a piece of cake. So now I've activated pesticide and you can see right now this text is at the bottom. So if I scroll down to this, the first thing, the parent of this image and this span, if you head over to the HTML, the parent of this image and this span is what? The footer, card underscore footer. So inside here is where I want to make this positioning work. So I'm going to do here position relative. That means this is going to be the new house of content I want to position. You can see right here when pesticide is activated that we have a space underneath this image. If I zoom in, you see we have some space underneath this image. Remember, The size of this image is 32 pixels over here. Let me see if I can change the size of this. Let me change the height to 32 pixels to see if this place would cover up. And cool, it covers up now. So we know that the height of this box is 32 pixels. So the next thing I'm going to do, since I've made this relative, it means I could actually position this span anywhere I want. So I could now say span what? Position absolute, because I also want it to scroll with the UI. I don't want it to be fixed whenever we scroll. I want it to also scroll just like this. So I could say position absolute. Then I could now say I want this to be at the top 0. Can you see it takes it to the top? Now you might say that this is the center, but this is not really the center. Can you see it's not really the center? It's a little bit pushed to the up. I could also say bottom 0. Let's see what happens. Cool. So now position top 0, bottom 0. So now this text now takes up the full height of the parent's container. But still yet the text is not centered. Let me try something. Let me see vertical, align, middle, save, nothing changed. Let's see what the vertical align property affects the vertical position of inline boxes generated by inline level elements inside box. So this doesn't work. So the next trick, most of these things I'm doing are just tricks. So the next trick I'll try would be to use the line to set the line height. Like I mentioned, CSS Flexbox fixes this. So the line height is what? Let me set the line height to the same as the height of the box. So let me say 32 pixels. And it centers the text to the middle. So the text is now aligned to the middle. One more thing, for instance, if I say, okay, top, bottom, I now say right to 0. Can you see? It pushes this text to the right. So that is the beauty of positioning elements using relative and absolute. So in a nutshell, when you want to have control of how you specifically position elements, the first thing to do would be to set the position of the parents to relative so that you would be able to position the child inside the parent. So if I remove this position relative, it is going to be relative to what? The entire body of the web page. Can you see? This text is now positioned absolutely to what? The body. But when we now set the parent, which is this footer, and give it relative, it kind of like limits the area we can actually position elements. So I'm going to turn off pesticide. There was a lot of back and forth in trying to get this UI to match, but if we take a good look at this, you can see if you put this UI side by side, not only did we get the user interface, we also got the actual dimensions of the spacing, and we also got the actual settings for the typography, which is the font size and the font color. One thing I think we missed right now is the font weight over here. You can see this text is bold, so I can just quickly do that right now. I could say font weight to 800, and we got this value from this style guide over here. You can see we are using 500 and 800. So I've set that to 800. Let me also check the font size. What's the font size? Text preset 3. So if we head over to the design system for text preset 3, you can see the font size is 14 pixels. So let's set that up. It's a little bit smaller. So let's take a look at this one last time. And we've matched the design to the finished product. So this is the basics of CSS for you. If you have any challenge with this, you can check the previous lesson to have an understanding of how the box model works. And in the next lessons, we'll be covering Flexbox and CSS Grid. With this, you'd have a more solid and modern approach to building layouts using CSS and HTML. That's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.